Well, welcome to session number 5 on the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. We are just into chapter 3 of the book. We spent 2 sessions preparing to look at this book, and there we considered some of the very important matters one needs to be familiar with when studying this book. Then in the first scene of the drama, we have the day of the wedding of Solomon and the Shulamite. When marriage is experienced in the way God planned it, this is one of the most important days of one's life. But the marriage of the most important man on earth at that time to a common vineyard worker way up in northern Israel begged an answer to this question: how did this wedding ever come to be? In the second scene, that question begins to find an answer. Solomon had a vineyard in Baal Haman, which I think was north of the Sea of Galilee, though that is not certain. In scene 2, Solomon comes to his vineyard and proposes to the Shulamite. From that, we may conclude that when he first met her, it was at this vineyard. And from that, we may conclude that a relationship developed before he proposed to her. Now Solomon has come and he proposes to the Shulamite. She asks him to go to a specific place, one it seems they both knew about, and then she goes to her brothers to ask permission because the Shulamite's brothers are responsible for her marriage. They try to stall her off because they are certain that this marriage is truly uncertain whether it's truly based on love. And the Shulamite then goes back to Solomon and asks him to leave until the next morning while she works this out between herself and her brothers. She is determined to secure their favor. They do come to an agreement somehow, and I expect that she said she would work in the vineyard for some time before she would marry Solomon. Maybe her brothers thought that would give them all some time and they would be more certain about this marriage. Well, that night, understandably, she cannot sleep, and that is where we left off in our last session, and that is where we will pick up today. And as we do, we go into chapter 3 of the Song of Songs. The Shulamite now sings to the audience. By night on my bed I sought the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. After she could not sleep, or I should say that night she tried to sleep and couldn't sleep. And I cannot determine what she means when she says, by night on my bed I sought the one I love. She has sent him to the mountains of separation, and that likely means to the closest village. She then says that she sought him but could not find him, which still seems to be while she is in bed. But she then says, I will rise now, I said, and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares, and I will seek the one I love. Some believe that what is described here is a dream. We had an event like this earlier that some see as a dream. But I think it is not a dream, for the outcome is real and not imagined. And it is understandable that she could not sleep. King Solomon has asked her hand in marriage. No wonder this is the Song of Songs. How could she have a chance for a better life where she lived? By now she had experienced a number of tragedies. Her parents are both gone. Her brothers have a constant watch over her. Her life is filled with work in the vineyard, and she lives very far from any big centers. So how could her situation ever become better? And now we could even imagine such a thing possible who could ever imagine this? That Solomon would come and ask her hand in marriage. And she has just overcome her last big hurdle, getting her brother's consent to marry King Solomon. And now he is not there and she cannot tell him. It is small wonder that she couldn't sleep this night. With her heart bursting, she can stay in bed no longer, and so she now determines to get up and go to the village to see if she can find him. She then runs to the village and goes from one place to another, but she still cannot find him. So having gone in search, she then says, "I sought him, but I did not find him." What a night this is turning out to be. Such joy, and now filled with such anxiety. The Shulamite continues her song to the audience. "The watchmen who go about the city found me. I said, 'Have you seen the one I love?'" By the word city, likely a village is meant, as these were scattered not far apart all over the land. It could not be otherwise than it was the talk of the town that Solomon was seeing the Shulamite. It has likely been talked about for months already. What must it have been like for a village to have the king come visiting quite often, especially if it was as far from Jerusalem as I think it was? When the watchman found her, she did not need to explain who the one was that she loves, because everybody knows. And it is not surprising that they would immediately know where he has gone, and shortly after that she finds him. So she sings, "Scarcely had I passed by them when I found the one I love. I held him and would not let him go, until I had brought him to the house of my mother and into the chamber of her who conceived me." When she says, "Scarcely had I gone by them when I had found the one I love," a literal reading is as the King James Version has it, "When I found him whom my soul loves." No doubt she informs him in great excitement that her brothers have given their consent, and that the mountains of Bether that separated them are no longer necessary. She held on to him and did not let him go until she had brought him to the house of her mother. Now, there is room enough in their home, since her mother's room is empty. This passage gives evidence that her mother is no longer with them. She brings Solomon to her home and lets him sleep in her mother's room. Now that she has reached an agreement with her brothers, who are there as well, this is all acceptable. So what a dramatic place to close this second scene. It closes like this in verse 5. "I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases." So we come to the second occurrence of these words. "And may every parent determine to give their children a sheltered life, so that each one can truly come to the time when love is awakened in a godly fashion. May every young couple determine this for their children. We live in a time when you cannot safely send your children to a government school and achieve what the Shulamite here so strongly encouraged. Each time these words are given, they are given in the morning. I think the purpose of these words is to encourage marriage only when true love has awakened and it has not been stirred up prematurely. So this brings us then now to the third scene. And I'll begin by introducing this third scene. It is a short scene, but it takes from the time Solomon went back to Jerusalem after he proposed to the Shulamite until he comes back to take her from the vineyard to Jerusalem as his bride. In scene 1, after having fallen in love with Solomon, the Shulamite and Solomon are married. In scene 2, we are taken back to see how this relationship began and then how it progressed to a proposal. After Solomon's proposal was accepted, he went back to Jerusalem, and for the first time, I believe in the first time in his life, that he has truly fallen in love. He was hopelessly smitten, having fallen in love at first sight. Then I expect he visited this vineyard a little more often, and in scene 2 he proposes to the Shulamite, but she faced opposition from her brothers. Then she sent Solomon away and had it out with her brothers, and she came out the victor, and now she is betrothed. Arriving back at Jerusalem, Solomon begins to prepare for the wedding. It was common for the wedding to take place about a year after the marriage agreement was made. At least it was so in the time of Christ. The bride would begin to prepare as well. But I doubt this bride will have needed to do much preparing, because her preparation will be made by the maids at Jerusalem. Solomon will likely have prepared a special room for the Shulamite to live in when she gets there. I think from some later information that she likely had a very privileged place among all the other women that Solomon had, somewhere close to where Solomon was. But Solomon also prepares a very fancy vehicle in which to bring his bride back to Jerusalem. Scene 3 opens as Solomon makes his way out of the wilderness and approaches the village at Baal-Hamon, where the Shulamite is anxiously waiting. This time, Solomon is not coming to check out how things are going on the vineyard or simply to visit the Shulamite. He has prepared a special vehicle to pick up his bride and to take her back to Jerusalem. She had promised her brothers to help with the vineyard, or so I think, during this crucial time. And now it is time for her to become the new queen. When the Shulamite will arrive in Jerusalem, she will enter the process of being prepared at the palace to become the wife of King Solomon. I originally saw scene 3 go from chapter 3 verse 6 through chapter 5 verse 1. But in 3:6 through 3:10 she is not yet married, but in 3:11 through 5:1 she is married. The language of 4:1 through 5:1 would not be proper for a premarital scene. That means that scene 3 begins in 3:6 and ends in 3:10, which makes it a very short section, and the next section then is quite long. If you have done picture puzzles, you know that in some puzzles a certain piece will fit in more than one place. Usually there is something to give away whether it actually belongs there or not. You will also know that it is never wise to force a piece to fit into a certain place. And so it is with this book. With regard to scene 3, I am not sure how far back the Jewish tradition goes where the bridegroom appeared at the bride's house at an unknown time, as it was done in the days when the New Testament was written. In the Jewish wedding tradition in the time of Christ, after the betrothal, the bride prepared for the wedding day, and the bridegroom went back to his father's house, and here he prepared a place for him and his wife to live together after they were married. When the new place was ready, he set out to bring his bride to his father's house. And in most Jewish weddings, the bride never knew exactly when the bridegroom would arrive. That is a picture of how it will be when Christ comes at the rapture for the church. We do not know exactly when he is arriving. By the way, the church is viewed as the bride of Christ in the New Testament. So if that was the case here, that it was about a year, then it may have been around a year before he returned, and no doubt the Shulamite has been anxiously waiting. But even if that was not the tradition, the Shulamite would not likely have known the exact time when he would come, so she has still been anxiously watching and waiting. We do not know who asked the question of verse 6, but I suggest it is the Shulamite. This scene is short in words, but long in distance. Solomon travels from Jerusalem to Baal-Hamon, and then they travel back together. So we begin this scene by reading the passage involved, which is from chapter 3, verse 6 through verse 11. Who is this coming out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the merchants' fragrant powders? Behold, it is Solomon's couch, with 60 valiant men around it, of the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man has his sword on his thigh because of fear in the night. Of the wood of Lebanon, Solomon, the king made himself a palanquin. He made its pillars of silver and its support of gold, its seat of purple, its interior paved with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. So the Shulamite says to, and I think probably her brothers, "Who is this coming out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the merchants' fragrant powders?" Anyone who studies this book soon learns that it is not always possible to identify the speaker or the one who is spoken to. I agree with the New King James Version that the question asked here is asked by the Shulamite, and I also think that when she asks the question, she already knows the answer. But it seems so unreal or surreal to her that Solomon is actually coming for her that it causes this outburst in the form of a question. It is clear who this one is who is coming, because he arrives like pillars of smoke. And though he is not yet there, she knows he is perfumed with myrrh and frankincense and with all the merchants' fragrant powders. It is a question asked when what is happening seems to be too good to be true, or as if it were a dream. Try to imagine this scene. Solomon has fallen in love with the Shulamite, a common vineyard worker. And this is something almost unheard of. She in turn has accepted his proposal for marriage, and she has now lived many days in anticipation, maybe wondering sometimes, I wonder if he's really going to come. Is this thing really going to come to pass? But she lives in hope. And then one day a large entourage is coming. Even from a distance, she immediately knows who it is, but she is so excited, she has to ask this question: who is this coming out of the wilderness? It is uncertain who gives the answer, but it may be her brothers. In verses 7 and 8, the Shulamite's brothers answer, "Behold, it is Solomon's couch, with 60 valiant men around it, of the valiant of Israel." Where he is coming from and where he is arriving is hard to determine if one does not have a grasp on the story. I have mentioned already that as I piece the story together, he has gone to prepare for the wedding at Jerusalem. And when all things are ready, he then goes back to the vineyard and his bride, for his bride to take her home to Jerusalem. And the Shulamite has been anxiously waiting and watching every day for the return of Solomon. Might she have had fears that something could have happened, or that he might have changed his mind? Whoever is coming, he is coming like pillars of smoke, which is likely the dust rising from the procession. This one who is coming but is perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, this is Solomon that is coming like this. And if this arrival of the bridegroom was a surprise, as in Jewish tradition in the time of Christ, Solomon's arrival is sudden and unannounced. Solomon arrives with a wedding coach that is ready, that is being carried by his servants, and it is decked out for a royal couple. So picture the scene. Who is this coming out of the wilderness? None other than Solomon. Picture a small village in northern Israel. Probably never gets to see the king out there, and here he comes for his bride in their village. Everything has been done to deck out his appearance, even perfume, and he is coming with 60 valiant men of Israel. One wonders, did he ever go for another bride like this? Verse 7 speaks of a couch. The Hebrew word is mittah, and is usually translated a bed or sometimes a bedchamber. Later in verse 9, it is referred to as a palanquin, and it would have been used to transport the new queen back to Jerusalem. She would be riding in style. Solomon is arriving at the Shulamite's home for the purpose of bringing her to Jerusalem for the wedding. And I propose every young woman in the country might have imagined what it would have been like to be a poor girl who works in a vineyard and then to become engaged to King Solomon and then have him coming for his new bride in such a decked out vehicle. It is, or if it was a year since he proposed to her, how often must she have wondered if he might come that day or even maybe the next day, or maybe whether he changed his mind or not. Then imagine one day dust plumes going up from a royal entourage. Would she not say, "Who is this coming out of the wilderness?" It is like a dream that is actually coming true. Now, further explanation of this entourage is now given in verses 8 through 10, speaking of these 60 valiant men. The narrator, I think, now says, "They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man has his sword on his thigh because of fear in the night." Now, it is my view that the most likely place where the Shulamite's home is in the land of Asher. Because of that, they would have had to stay night in the wilderness somewhere, so they traveled prepared to fight enemies, whether robbers or wild animals, at night. I understand that this is northern Israel, that they had lions and leopards at that time. Now verses 9 and 10 go on to describe the palanquin. "Of the wood of Lebanon, Solomon the king made himself a palanquin. He made its pillars of silver, its support of gold, its seat of purple, its interior paved with love by the daughters of Jerusalem." Everything here speaks of love and royalty. We are told that Solomon made himself a palanquin. It is decked out to the nines. In verse 10, we have the fifth occurrence of the word ahava. The interior was paved or fit together or patterned with marital love in mind. And this had been done by the daughters of Jerusalem, the maids assigned to look after the Shulamite when she came. Look at the interior of a car of a young man who is courting. Open the door and you smell some kind of perfume. Fancy things hang from the mirror, and there are soft seat covers. The interior is paved with love. Look at that car a few years down the road, and there's a diaper bag and car seats, and things have changed. But we must not think of that at this very special stage of life unless we have been married for some time and need to be reminded of how it once was. Here's a sample of a palanquin, and we'll have that if we could now, James. Here's a picture of a royal palanquin. This is a picture taken in India. So you see how fancy it is. Can you imagine something like this arriving at the Shulamite's humble vineyard home? If one studies verses 9 and 10, certainly it would have been a very gorgeous palanquin. Let me give you another example of a palanquin, and men carrying this one with the bride as well. Now, one writer pointed out that the apocryphal book of 1 Maccabees draws a picture of a scene similar to this in Maccabees 9:37 through 39. The Maccabees are books given in between the Old and New Testament. They're called the apocryphal books. And if you are German by background, many of our old German Bibles had the apocryphal books in them. It was a time of much upheaval, and the Jonathan of these verses is Jonathan Maccabeus, a Jewish general and the son of the priest Mattathias, very significant men in those days. And these verses that I will read here give this account of a wedding procession, such as we have in the song in our present scene. And it says this: "After this came word to Jonathan and Simon his brother, that the children of Jambi had a great marriage, and were bringing the bride from Nadabatha with a great train, as being the daughter of one of the great princes of Canaan. Therefore they remembered John their brother, and went up and hid themselves under covert of the mountains, where they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, there was much ado and great carriage. And the bridegroom came forth, and his friends and brethren, to meet them with drums and instruments of music and many weapons." So there we have a picture somewhat of what this would have been like. So after all preparations for the return trip have been made, Solomon and his new bride are on their way back to Jerusalem. So can you picture the young bride who has spent years working in the vineyard, and she is leaving in a fancy palanquin? What a wedding this is going to be. So in scene 2, we ask, how did it happen that Solomon married the woman who worked on one of his vineyards? Well, that is how it happened. As I outlined this book in the chiasmus, we have come now to the second act. I said there were 2 acts in the book, Act 1 and Act 2. I don't know if you remember the chiasmus, but it goes from A, B, C, and we have come from A to B to C, and now we will start at C, B, and A, and go all the way back. So before we begin scene 4, let us go back to see where we are now. Scene 1 described the wedding day. Scene 2 takes us back to the time when this relationship began, and scene 3 describes how Solomon proposed to the Shulamite and how she gained her brother's approval. Solomon then went back to Jerusalem to prepare for this wedding, and in scene 3 Solomon came back to Baal Haman to take his new bride to Jerusalem to marry her. Now the first scene starts on the wedding day and in marital bliss. It is such a surprising match, a wise king and a vineyard worker, that one is made to wonder how this match happened. That question is answered in the next 2 scenes, and it takes us up to chapter 3, verse 10. So I might now ask, how does chapter 3, verse 11, relate to chapter 3, verses 6 through 10? In 3:6 through 10, Solomon goes from Jerusalem to Baal Haman to bring the Shulamite back to Jerusalem. Verse 11 then says, "Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding." Now, if you were assigned to look into this, you would have to say, how does this verse relate to everything that has gone before? Well, in this verse, they are married. So our question is, how are these verses related to what went on before? I propose that 3:11 begins scene 4, but it begins a new act. We might ask, if the Shulamite and Solomon were in such deep love and they got married, how did that work out with Solomon having so many wives? How did the Shulamite handle that? And that is what this book will now deal with. In 3:11, we are now first taken back to when the time of the wedding and when the wedding was in its last stage. So we're back. The first scene was the time of the wedding, the beginning of the wedding. We're now looking at the last part. Remember, the wedding was a number of days. In some cases, it could be weeks long, but usually around 7 days in the time of Christ. So in the first scene, we have the day of the wedding, and now we have the end of the day of the wedding, and it will take us to what happened after they were married. So remember that a wedding did not take place in one day. It could last for many days. So it begins after the private marriage is over. Later, they are presented to the general public. One verse is given to the description of that time in this section now. And then their married life begins, and it all starts off as a most wonderful marital relationship. Later, when the Shulamite begins to feel at home and the great social barrier between her and the rest of the palace becomes more comfortable to her, her marriage takes a bad turn and ends up in turmoil. There is some consensus that the second half of this book explains how their relationship deepens after they overcome a major problem. Here is the danger when the first phase of married life turns into a more normal state. It may start off well. I'm always sorry to hear someone who got married and it didn't start off well, and it happens. So it may start off well, but once one learns to know one's partner, maybe you'll learn to know some of the bad things, some of the things you don't like. Now, difficulties may set in. This is the stage when the honeymoon is over. In the scenes before us, the honeymoon is over. So in verses 4, 1 through 15, we have a whole song in which Solomon pours out his love to the Shulamite. This is when they were still in the honeymoon stage of marital bliss. Having read numerous commentaries that view this book as speaking of God's relationship with Israel or Christ's relationship with the church, it seems to me that this chapter makes it nigh well impossible to hold to an allegorical view of the book consistently and meaningfully. So we begin now by reading the whole scene, and it is a long scene compared to the other one, from chapter 3 verse 11 through chapter 6 verse 10. And so we'll read that. Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart. Behold, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep which have come up from the washing. Every one of which bears twins, and none is barren among them. Your lips are like a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. You are all fair, my love, and there is no spot in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the lions' dens, from the mountains of the leopards. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. You have ravished my heart with one look of your eyes, with one link of your necklace. How fair is your love, my sister, my spouse. How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes than all spices. Your lips, O my spouse, drip as a honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, fragrant henna with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. By the way, notice as we read through, where in the middle of a sentence you have capitals. These are all new lines. A fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south. Blow upon my garden, that its spices may flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits. I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O friends, drink. Yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, Open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one, for my head is covered with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. I have taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I defile them? My beloved put his hand by the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and was gone. My heart leaped up when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. The watchmen who went about the city found me. They struck me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took my veil away from me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him I am lovesick. What is your beloved more than another beloved, O fairest among women? What is your beloved more than another beloved, that you so charge us? My beloved is white and ruddy, chief among 10,000. His head is like the finest gold. His locks are wavy and black as raven. His eyes are like doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. His eyes are like doves by the rivers of waters. Oh, I read that already. Verse 13. His cheeks are like a bed of spices, banks of scented herbs. His lips are lilies dripping liquid myrrh. His hands are rods of gold set with beryl. His body is carved ivory inlaid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of fine gold. His countenance is like Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yes, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Where has your beloved gone, O fairest among women? Where has your beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with you? My beloved has gone to his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed his flock in the gardens, and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feeds his flock among the lilies. O my love, you are as beautiful as Tirzah, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have overcome me. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep which have come up from the washing. Everyone bears twins, and none is barren among them. Like a piece of pomegranate are your temples behind your veil. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, the favorite of the one who bore her. The daughters saw her and called her blessed, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. Who is she who looks forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, awesome as an army with banners? And so with that long reading, we'll begin with the interpretation. Now it would be a nice assignment, wouldn't it, for you to take this and spend a couple of weeks and see if you could take apart the scenes and check to see what is really happening here. We go back to chapter 3, verse 11, to begin our interpretation of scene 4. An assigned person now instructs the daughters of Zion. Now remember, we have come now to the end of the wedding, and this is where these next scenes begin, at the end of the wedding day. Go forth now, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart. In 3:11, Solomon and the Shulamite are married, and we will now learn how the marriage worked out. In 3:11, we are at the close of the wedding. In 4:1 through 16, we are in the honeymoon stage. In 4:1 and on, we enter marital problems, and all the rest of the book will tell us how that worked out. Now first, the words of verse 11, "Go forth, O daughters of Zion." Who are these daughters of Zion? I took for granted that they were the daughters of Jerusalem, the Shulamite's maids. The daughters of Zion are mentioned only this one time in the book, but the daughters of Jerusalem are mentioned 7 times, and one of those is in the verse right before this verse, the one that mentions the daughters of Zion. The general feeling of other interpreters is that the daughters of Jerusalem and the daughters of Zion are one and the same group. But the question is, how can they be the same? Why call them the daughters of Jerusalem 7 times and the daughters of Zion once? I can't tell you the amount of study I went through here, the difficulty this section caused me. And I really would have liked to explain how everything came about to where I came to this understanding, but it took a long time. So, why call them the daughters of Jerusalem 7 times and the daughter of Zion once? I concluded that they are not called the daughters of Jerusalem here because they are not the same group. Furthermore, the daughters of Jerusalem, who were those who served the Shulamite, would not have been told to go forth to see him with the crown that his mother crowned him with on the day of his wedding, because they would have been there to see it. The daughters of Jerusalem would have been there when she came. They wouldn't have said, go see this now. So why would another group that is called the daughters of Zion be instructed to go see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him? Who are they? In studying the phrase, the daughters of Zion, I found that this phrase is mentioned only 3 other times in the Old Testament. And the other 3 times it refers to the wealthy ladies of Jerusalem. I do not know how alike wedding traditions in Solomon's days were to weddings in the time of Christ, but in the New Testament, Jewish weddings would go on for some 7 days, with only special invited guests present. On the first of those days, the wedding proper takes place, and this would be the day Solomon's mother would have given him the crown. When those days were fulfilled, then the other invited guests would come. This is the part of the wedding Jesus and his disciples were invited to, and it was toward the end of the wedding when he got there, as is evident from the fact that they had already drunk all the wine they had used for the wedding. It is my conclusion that this was an invitation to the general public to come and see King Solomon and his new wife, and Solomon is wearing the crown his mother gave him some days earlier, and he will come before the people so that they can get a glimpse of him. So who would be more interested in seeing the new couple and Solomon with the crown with which Bathsheba crowned him than the daughters of Zion? With regard to the crown that is mentioned here, the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament says this word, a general term for crown, should be distinguished from netzar, the royal or priestly crown. End quote. They then say that the atara, which is this crown, can speak of the crown of queens, of crown of nobility, or the bridegroom. It could be made of gold or silver, or it could simply be a garland. From this, I could not but conclude that this was the time of the wedding, the closing time. Now, as we have noted earlier, verse 11 does not take place on the day of the wedding, but after the private festivities are over, which would be at least a number of days later. In this verse, Solomon appears, and I would think, with the Shulamite beside him for the public presentation of the couple to the people of Jerusalem. It is noteworthy that Solomon's mother is mentioned. It seems that this is a wedding Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, is pleased with, as it is given special mention here. That she crowned him with this crown on the day of his wedding indicates that the day the daughters of Zion are instructed to go forth and see the couple is not the day of the wedding. Only one verse is given to this part of the story. All the rest will relate to other things in this section. Well, after the new couple make their public appearance, normal married life will begin with Solomon and the Shulamite. But the question is, can married life ever be normal for a woman who truly loves her husband when he has other wives? We asked earlier, if the Shulamite and Solomon were in such deep love, how did this work out with Solomon having so many other wives? How did the Shulamite handle that? And that is what I believe the rest of this book is about. Well, their married life began well. Solomon and the Shulamite sing to each other of their love for each other, and in 4:1 through 15 we have Solomon's song to his new wife. We read it earlier, but let me read verses 1 and 2. The beloved sings this song to the bride. Behold, you are fair, my love, behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. Now, I don't know if you have ever seen a flock of goats or a flock of sheep going down hills. And if there's a big group of them, it's like wavy hair. It's just all these goats going down. And that's the picture that we are given here. When it says your teeth are like a flock of sheep, this is a simile. It is said, your teeth are like a flock of sheep. Now, no, I would say, if it said your teeth are a flock of sheep, now it would be a metaphor. An extended metaphor is an allegory, and an extended simile is a parable. As we have seen, most interpreters view this book as an allegory. Now, in interpreting a passage like this, you have to determine what it means. In the allegorical interpretation, one commentary says, the next feature brought before us in the king's description of the spouse is her teeth. And this would set forth ability to avail oneself of spiritual food. Remember, everything is spiritualized. Under grace, we acquire the ability to feed, and this is attractive to the Lord. Here's the allegorical approach to the book. He furnishes food supply in abundance, but his pleasure is found in seeing us able to make use of it. There are many forms of spiritual food typified in the Passover lamb, by manna, flesh, corn, bread, etc. But unless we have the ability to feed on them, they do not sustain or strengthen us. Now here's the symbolical interpretation of the book. Now my difficulty with the allegorical approach is, what evidence in Scripture is there for this interpretation? These verses are mostly similes, which are then taken allegorically. And I think this makes any interpretation with any certainty impossible. Ponder that as we go through this chapter. If one takes the literal approach, most of 4:1 through 5:1 is simply understood literally. This is how he views the Shulamite. So in reading this section, one notes that many similes are used as your hair is like, or your teeth are like. Taking this as a drama, I do not think the teeth are meant to be taken to speak allegorically of something else. Solomon is speaking of the beauty of the Shulamite, and her teeth are beautiful. I very seldom, you ever notice somebody's teeth? I very seldom look at somebody's teeth. But my cousin had a daughter, and I noted her teeth. They were like the teeth described here. You just could hardly miss it. It was just like all the teeth had twins, and that's how he describes them here. So I believe in his song, he sings of her teeth. Her literal teeth are meant. In Israel, her teeth being compared to a flock of shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing, is a picture they would have understood. You know, sheep, they get kind of yellow and kind of colored by the time their wool is long. And then when they get shorn and washed up, they come out white. I was just at the dentist the other day, and he scraped a lot of stuff off my teeth. Got my teeth all smooth and white again. So I wonder, do you ever tell your partner what you like or what is outstanding about him or her? I think a person might learn from this book how we might say things to our partner. Husband and wife might read through such passages as this and seek to understand the picture he is drawing. When you compliment your partner in the positive things you see or admire, it can really build up the marriage. When you say things like, oh, you know what, you're just like your mother, you just tear your marriage down. It just does not bode well. So taking the literal approach, a husband and wife might take time together to seek to interpret such passages as this chapter or even the whole book. Verse 3, your lips are like a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. Now, before we go on in this chapter, I have mentioned in the introduction that if one takes this book as speaking of God and Israel or Christ and the church, how does one interpret chapter 4? For example, in verse 5, it speaks of the breasts. Matthew Poole says in his commentary, by which some understand the two testaments or the two sacraments, but these are rather Christ's than the church's breasts, end quote. This is the allegorical view, how it interprets these passages. The question is, on what ground could you say these are the two testaments? What ground do you have? Is there anything anywhere that would indicate this? And so I just personally can't see the book as being meant to be interpreted like that. Now let me read what he says of the eyes. Here, that's the commentary, here her eyes are said to be within her locks, which whether understood of the ministers of the gospel or of the eyes of the understanding particularly, or of the eyes of faith as it has been observed on the above place, do not seem so much to design the imperfection of the sight of the one or of the other in the present state, as eyes within or under locks and in some measure covered with them hinder the sight of them, as the modesty of either of them. Locks being decently tied up, as the word signified, is a sign thereof, that is decency and modesty, as the contrary is a sign of boldness and wantonness. Doves' eyes themselves are expressive of modesty and humility, and this phrase added to them increases the idea. Such ministers, now he says this speaks of the ministers of Christ, who have the largest gifts, greatest grace, light, and knowledge, are the most humble. Witness the Apostle Paul, and this phrase expresses the beauty of them, not only in the eyes of Christ, but in the eyes of those whom they publish the good tidings of salvation. And so it may denote what an exceeding modest grace faith is, which receives all from Christ and gives him all the glory and takes none to itself, and what a beauty there is in it, insomuch that Christ is ravished with it, and seems rather to be the sense here. Now this is an old writer, and they wrote in sentences that were quite long, like a long paragraph, and it's hard to understand, but you get some idea of the interpretation of the allegorical approach, like taking the eyes of as being the ministers of Christ or so on. Now, in such ways is how most interpret this book, as well as the book of Revelation, and I cannot see how this can be correct. So we go on to verse 6 with Solomon's description of the Shulamite. From these descriptions, you will understand that unless he was a man of integrity, he would not have been able to describe her as he does until after they were married. Verse 6, until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountains of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. I have mentioned earlier, I have mentioned that I won't explain all of what I see in these verses, but if the book interests you, you might ponder such verses as verse 6 and say, what does this figure of speech mean? Verse 7, you are all fair, my love. There is no spot in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the lions' dens and from the mountains of the leopards. Now verse 8 speaks of the leopards that I mentioned earlier, of which Albert Barnes, who wrote in the 1800s, said that at that time they were still seen quite often in the area spoken of here. So from this verse, it would fit that Baal-Hamon was in the land of Asher. It has also been recommended that Baal-Hamon was just off the peak of Mount Hermon, so it's not sure where it was. Verse 9, you have ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. You have ravished my heart with one look of your eyes, with one link of your necklace. How fair is your love, my sister, my spouse. How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes than all spices. Your lips, O my spouse, drip as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates. By the way, you know how precious pomegranates are in Israel? You can go down there and visit there. Certain time of the year, you go along the streets and there'll be somebody there and they'll take a fresh pomegranate and squeeze all the juice out, and you can drink this juice, and it's just very good. So your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, fragrant henna with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. A fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. These are words of love Solomon poured forth upon the Shulamite after they are married. Solomon is deeply in love with the Shulamite, and the marriage is going well. And we are going to pick up there next time. Now they have just been married. The honeymoon is on. And in the next section, trouble strikes the marriage, and we'll look at what happens there beginning next time. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for your word. And Lord, I want to thank you for marriage. And I pray, Lord, that any married people listening to these messages, sessions, would somehow be encouraged to see how very precious marriage is and how important it is how we treat our spouse. I pray your blessing on this session. In Jesus' name, amen.